which is a Public Works Department item. I asked to have it agendized. This is really seeking authorization for my signature as mayor on the letter, suggested support letter for OCWD's North Basin project. We have Mr. Bill Hunt here from OCWD this evening. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, members of the City Council.
You know, there was no charge for you for all this entertainment leading up to this item.
It's been an interesting night.
I think
I'm glad
so.
to be here.
Thank you.
Well, tonight, what I'd like to discuss is the proposed NPL listing for the North Basin groundwater cleanup project. As introduced, I'm Bill Hunt. I work for the Orange County Water District, and what I do there is I manage the environmental cleanups at large groundwater contaminated sites. I've been in the environmental restoration business since 1977, so about 40 years. The North Basin is, I'll give an update on the current activities. What we've done is we've developed a scope of work to do an assessment in the North Basin along with the United States EPA, the US EPA. We've been out there working for many years and with state agencies, with the DTSC and the regional board. But a few years ago, we asked the EPA to get involved in the oversight of this project. So in that effort, we negotiated a scope of work with them that was fairly unique. Normally the EPA, when they manage a project like this, they do it with potentially responsible parties, with polluters essentially, that are responsible to do the full assessment and cleanup of the site. The Orange County Water District is not a PRP. We're not a polluter. So it was very unusual for them to enter into a cooperative agreement with an agency like ours. As a matter of fact, we negotiated an agreement called an ASA, which was entirely unique, the first in the nation like that. So I think the EPA sees what we're doing here as perhaps a new model for more efficiently going after projects like this. So in that, what we did that's different than a normal agreement with them is that we limited the study. We didn't enter into a comprehensive study that covered the whole of the plume. I mean, there's a 5-mile-long plume here under this city, and we focused our study on the area, the worst of it. So we went into the very hot areas, and we wanted to do additional assessment work, what's called a remedial investigation, and then develop a feasibility study that would lead to an interim remedy, not the ultimate remedy. So our scope of work with the EPA was to do a limited study and develop an interim remedy to capture the worst of the contamination. When that work is done, then our obligation to the EPA is over. So unlike a normal PRP that's on the hook for the life of the project, the Water District's agreement ends after the feasibility study is done. So initially that study included 14 monitoring wells at 8 locations. After we finalized our agreement with the EPA, they came back and after they reconsidered, and they became worried about the Fullerton well field more than anything else, and they've asked us to expand our study, and I'll show you what additional wells they've asked for. The EPA, or the regional board and the DTSC also were looking to get some additional work done by us that was outside of the original scope. So they also asked for more study. But one thing that was good is that we had to apply for grant money from the state Prop 1 fund, so we were awarded a $1 million pre-award for $1 million grant. So for planning studies, there was a cap of $1 million. Well, they said if you do these extra work for the EPA and for the state, we'll consider lifting the cap and going 50% on that work, which again is very unusual. So we haven't finalized all those negotiations and discussions with Prop 1 yet, but and we haven't approved that work from our board yet either, but we're on track to expand our study and to receive additional money from the state for that effort. So here's a picture of the North Basin plume. Many of you have seen this before. And here's a diagram showing the wells that are part of this feasibility study that we're working on now. We've already put more than 70 wells in the ground out there since the 1990s, so we've been at this for a long time. But the new wells that the EPA asked for in the first statement of work are the ones highlighted in yellow. And then these orange locations are the wells that were subsequently added. Our board has approved the installation of the 6 of the yellow colored wells. So we're proceeding with that work now. And we're working out locations for the others. And then we'll soon be going to our board asking for approval for that. Several production wells have been impacted by this contamination. These images show the wells that have been taken out of service as a result of being contaminated by the plume. So it's a pretty serious situation. And you can see down here, this, moving the blue dots, this cluster of wells right here is your Fullerton or your La Palma Avenue well field. And about probably in excess of 70% of the city's water comes from these wells right here. So this is critical infrastructure for the city, and there really is no plan B. Those wells must be protected. And which is why the EPA has asked for these wells here. These 2 new monitoring wells right here are specifically intended to get an early warning on the arrival of contaminants in those wells, and just to understand the geology better in that area. So here's a picture of one of your wells. You can see the diagram on the right is the PCE concentrations in Fullerton production well F-7, and there's several years worth of data here from 1985 to now, and there's an unmistakable trend there. You can see that the concentrations in the past several years 10 years have been climbing dramatically. The well was approaching the MCL, that PCE MCL line high on the graph is the state drinking water standard. That well's been recently taken out of service by the city, and it's located in that well field. You can see where the green dot just went that it's in that well cluster. Here's an Anaheim well that's pretty far downfield, and you can see the trends are similar. This is the Dad Miller Golf Course well, and you can see that the concentrations there over the last several years have steadily increased also. So the plume is on the march, and it's quite a distance away from the source areas. And you can see that well is located. Actually, our plume map is so old that it doesn't even extend to that well yet. So when we update this map, when this new round of wells goes in, that plume map will extend down to the Dad Miller Golf Course well for sure. Here's another monitoring well located pretty much in the heart of the plume, and you can see the concentrations there over the past 12 years. There's just an unmistakable trend that the PCE concentrations in the principal aquifer have been increasing steadily. So the Water District has had a 2-path strategy in recent years, the last couple of years. Originally it was one path, which was litigation. We worked with the state agencies. We weren't satisfied with the progress on the off-site work. The on-site work, in many cases, was going pretty well. But the downgradient plumes, the commingled plumes off the sites, was not being adequately addressed. So the Water District filed suit against a group of PRPs. That litigation has been a struggle, to say the least. We lost in state court. It went to appeal, and we recently got a verdict back from the appeals court that's sort of a mixed bag. Many of the defendants in the case were found that they weren't responsible for much of the plume, and they were the ruling stood for them. Others, the largest being Northrop Grumman, was found was remanded. Their case was remanded back to the lower court. So they're still on the hook.
And who were the others?
The other,
You said that Northrop and others, that the case against Northrop and others were found in your favor. But it's my understanding that only a very small portion of the Northrop case was found in your favor.
Northrop had 3 sites, 2 of them, the Y12 site and the Kester Solder site, which are 2 of the fairly major sources out there, were found in our favor.
So it's just the Northrop?
It's just Northrop.
Okay.
I'm sorry if I said there were others.
Right.
No, just Northrop. We could spend a whole night just talking about the legal rulings.
You and I certainly could.
In any case, that's what we're really not here to talk about tonight. Tonight's about the second path of our strategy, which is the NPL listing path. And what's typical in one of these cases is that the EPA will list a site, and once listed, they'll go through a process of an analytical process and list the site on the national priorities list. And then once listed, we'll do the RIFS to expedite things, and because they had a cooperative party in the water district, we're doing them in parallel. So the listing process and the RIFS process are being done at the same time. And that's just for the sake of efficiency. It's faster. So we've proceeded with the RIFS work ahead of the NPL listing. And one of the steps along the way is that the EPA asks the governor if he would support listing of the site. They do that. The EPA can list it with or without the governor's concurrence, but as a practical matter, they probably won't. So this is a real important decision and point in this process. The governor's approval means a lot. So if the 2 possible outcomes, either the governor agrees to support the ongoing listing, doesn't mean the site's necessarily going to be listed, but the process will continue. If he does agree to continue with the process, the earliest that we would have a listing decision would be in September 2018. It could be September 2019.
And when is your feasibility study going to be complete?
Probably at the end of this year or so. We hope to have it done by the end of the year. There's some more wells and work that was added, so it'll probably be about the same time that that listing decision will be made. But one doesn't depend on the other. They're independent processes. If the governor objects to listing, that would effectively shut down this Superfund threat against the PRPs. So the way those 2 scenarios might play out, if the governor allows the NPL listing process to continue, that would, would be that the PRPs in the water district could settle our lawsuit and agree on a cooperative cleanup effort, and rendering the need for NPL listing, it would no longer be needed. So the EPA would be totally happy with that kind of an outcome, that the PRPs, seeing the threat of a listed site, which would force them to do a bunch of expensive cleanup work, would, I would think if I were them, it would make an agreement with the water district look more favorable. Because if it goes the distance to NPL listing, then they would be subject to EPA orders. We wouldn't. If we agreed on a cooperative cleanup, we would participate in that effort and offset, a bunch of their liability. The other option is the site is listed on the NPL and no deal is made between the PRPs and the Orange County Water District. And then that would allow the EPA would then direct the PRPs that they found responsible. The results of our lawsuit really don't matter much to the EPA. So Northrop's on the hook still for another round of court fight with us, but the others aren't. But in this scenario, the EPA could look at other PRPs perhaps to bring them into a cooperative cleanup.
Some of whom have already paid settlements to you and that wouldn't necessarily be honored by the EPA.
That's right. The EPA doesn't care about any deal that we have, but we care. And I'm pretty confident, I can't speak for our board officially, but I'm pretty confident that our board would make them whole. I mean, we receive money from them to do cleanup work, and we would offset their liabilities with the money that they've already put forward. I'm very confident that our board would do that. But you're right, it's not in the EPA's calculus. The other option is that the governor opposes NPL listing. Then that could go a couple of ways. We could stand down and go back to the way it was before and let the state agencies regulate these sites. I don't think our board would do that. It's not a realistic option because of the urgency of this problem. And that would lead to, option B, which is to for the water district to just take it up and clean it up ourselves using ratepayer funds. So our board recommends as the next step that our water producers and the City of Fullerton certainly would like your support as we ask the governor to concur with the EPA's recommendation to continue with the NPL listing process. The option to avoid Superfund status still exists, and it will up until the day of actual listing. With regard to the negative stigma that goes with having a Superfund site in Fullerton, there are studies out there, and the EPA is pretty confident about this, that actually shows that property values increase when a site is listed, when a known polluted site is listed, because people in the community know that something's being done. The ongoing threat of listing is the best way to bring the PRPs to the negotiating table. It's certainly a more onerous prospect from their vantage point than our lawsuits have been. We haven't been very successful with those. And it protects our ratepayers against the full economic risk of the cleanup. And most importantly for Fullerton is that we've talked a lot about the remedy up to now for the interim remedy, the control of the plume in that hot area. What hasn't been discussed is the possibility that contamination impacts Fullerton's well field eventually. When that happens, that's a big project. And you're definitely going to want the EPA in the game if that happens, because those costs would be significantly more than we're talking about now with the interim remedy going to the sanitary sewer, things like that. So that's all I've got for tonight. If there are any questions.
I have a couple more.
Okay.
It's my understanding from meetings that I attended that there were many off-ramps in this process. And the only off-ramp I see now in the process is the governor denying listing this site.
Yes.
I'd love your perspective on that.
That's certain. I don't know if I'd call that an off-ramp, but it would end the process, certainly, if the governor denied it. Another off-ramp is that our board pulled out of the process and no longer supported listing. Another off-ramp would be for the PRPs to, form a voluntary working group with us and whoever else was interested. For instance, Pitney Bowes has now recently agreed with the DTSC to get involved and do cleanup work. They're a major, and they got the Chicago Musical Instruments site, so they're a major player. So there are PRPs out there that we could make a deal with, and we're doing pretty good negotiating with Northrop up until their attorney. We had Elizabeth Brown was their attorney that we worked closely with. She was wonderful, but then she took a job at Southern California Edison, and our process kind of stalled after that. But I'm confident that the PRPs will see that it's in their own interest and that of the community to do a voluntary cleanup, and that might avoid NPL listing, but not necessarily.
Well, and then I had understood that you would not seek NPL listing until you were done with your RI and your FS.
It's been my understanding from the beginning that it was a parallel process. Normally the listing process occurs, as I said, before you do an RIFS. we were doing the RIFS way ahead of schedule just to get it done. But I never understood them to be sequential, but the conversations back in the early days, it could be that there was murky communication in that regard. So I'm not denying that might have been said, but that's not where we are now.
I have a quick question for you. So if you could walk me through the treatment of the VOCs. My understanding is the plume is pretty much all VOC related, and the treatment's relatively easy.
Yeah, most of it's the most worrisome of the constituents are VOCs. They're chlorinated solvents, which are degreasers, like dry cleaning fluid type, what they call DNAPLs. And those can be treated fairly easily using activated carbon. So you put big carbon containers out there. But in certain parts of the plume, we also have perchlorate and we have nitrate. Perchlorate's a salt. It's not as toxic as VOCs, but it is. There are sensitive populations that, like expectant mothers, they can't be exposed to it. That requires ion exchange normally, or some other treatment like that, which is actually very expensive. But a lot of the PRPs aren't responsible for that perchlorate. So who's going to clean that up? I mean, there again, beg your pardon?
Perchlorate, I mean, that we get that in our Colorado River water, don't we?
We do. Mm-hmm. Well, we did. I'm not sure we still do, but there was a time. From the Henderson, yes, perchlorate did come with Colorado River water. It also comes from agriculture, and some of it's naturally occurring, but not much. But the treatment, the initial treatment that we're right now, we've installed EW1, the most important of the wells that we've already put in the ground. We've gone ahead and completed that. We're nearly complete with constructing that well and the pumping system. That's out in front of the EPA process. So we really are we're not officially approved by EPA for that work, and cost recovery on that might not happen because of that. But we felt it was important. We collaborated with the Orange County Sanitation District on an interim option there where we put that water to the sanitary sewer. It goes down to the OCSD, gets treated there, and then it goes to our GWRS facility, gets recycled there. All of it finds its way back into the ground. So there's no water wasted. And we'd like to do that with more of that additional wells, but that will depend on the EPA. It'll be their call.
Right. Thank you.
I wanted to add that it was clear from the outset on this, with the EPA making us aware by the letter that Fullerton had the most to lose here in the near term, that we've already experienced 3 wells being knocked out because of too high concentrations being had. And so I met with interim city manager Roeder and with Mr. Hoppy and with Hagen from our water utility, and we all concurred that we had a lot to lose. I mean, this is the very significant source of our local drinking water, and there's been many year delay in this process. And the problem's only going to make itself more evident. So we had a near-term deadline to get a letter to Governor Brown to urge his concurrence with this process. We've received buy-in from most local legislators very rapidly. I think Fullerton has the most to lose in this, and the fallback option is to, in some way, stick all of our ratepayers with the entire cost of the cleanup. Potentially, that's a fallback. So it's not really a scare tactic. It's just really that's the alternative here.
Mr. Mayor, may I? Just one question. Why would, I guess, the Orange County Business Council be opposed to us sending a letter or listing it, listing the plume? Do you have an idea?
I can't speak on their behalf. I did read their letter, and we responded to a lot of it. I don't I don't know. They represent business interests. They're, from what I've been able to gather from them, they're worried about the negative stigma of having a Superfund site. They're worried about the fairness question with regard to us having settled lawsuits with many of these PRPs and them re-exposed to environmental liabilities with the EPA. And so issues like that, I think. Okay. So they have real legitimate concerns also, but it doesn't change the fact that going forward, having the EPA here really is the right thing to do, in my opinion, and that of our board.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Mr. Hoppy, is there anything additional to add or correct or refine based on what's been said so far?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The only thing I'd like to clarify is that we are still able to pump clean water, healthy water for all of the residents. We did lose a couple of wells, but we have more than enough capacity to meet our requirements in terms of the basin pumping percentage that OCWD sets for us. As anecdotally, the wells at that particular site, the main plant, are quite old, over 70 years old, and we actually are having more problems with back T markers coming up when we test it and have to shut it down and flush it with chlorine. So as part of the CIP process this year, we included looking at installing a new deeper well at the main plant, which would two benefits. One, it'll be a more robust well, and it'll be brand new, and it'll be deeper. It'll be probably around 1,500 feet instead of 500 feet. So all of that is currently in the process and planning to add more robust and more ability to meet the challenges that may happen in terms of what would occur at the shallower wells that we have at that site. And it is a very significant amount of water that we get from that site.
Great. Thank you for the addition. If there are no other questions by council at this time, we could invite public comment.
North Basin site. Sounds like a good idea. We don't need any poisons going into our groundwater basin. I had followed something. I saw a Superfund site on the item, and there was a site in San Bernardino or Riverside called Springfellow or Ingfellow, the acid pits that were approaching the Santa Ana River and was going to come rushing down here and destroy our groundwater. And I was at a meeting of the water board at the Santa Ana Council Chambers, and I brought that up. And he said, oh, well, that was put on the Superfund site. They cleaned it up. It's no longer an issue. And I said, well, that's nice. You know, they made such a big deal out of it. And then when they cleaned it up, they never told anybody. But a Superfund site, whatever, you know, it sounds like there is a problem there. Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council. I remember when this came before the Council before, and our previous Water Director, Jan Flory, also, much like Bruce Whitaker, I'm currently sitting on the board. I'm assuming your position is similar to hers, with having all the information available to you, that this is a very serious issue for our city. And so I'm just, as a member of the public, I want to support our staff's recommendation. The thorough report is very much appreciated as a resident to know really what's going on, and I know that you'll do the responsible thing and submit this letter to the governor. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, we'll bring the item back to council.
I'd move to table the item.
I would instead move to authorize the mayor to sign and send a letter in support of listing the basin on the national priority list.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any further comment or questions?
Yeah, I would just say I've always been against this. I don't think anyone in any agency in its right mind invites the EPA to say, hey, look at us. You can do a better job than we can. at cleaning up our own area. I think the great delay has been caused by OCWD taking a lawsuit strategy for over a decade, and now the answer is this great stick of the EPA. And as I was told, there were many off ramps along the way. The path is all about getting listing as an MPL. And I'm opposed to it. I do not think that helps our city, and it doesn't help us clean up the contamination there any faster. In fact, it delays the cleanup.
From my perspective, there's been so much local wrangling going on that this cuts through it with the EPA. They are the take charge guy, and I think that's the best way to do it, and we need to get it done and moving as quickly as we can. It is our water supply that is threatened by this.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed?
No.
4-1.